Hi, everyone. Welcome back to In Session with Ashley B. I'm your host, Ashley Buckner, and I'm so excited to be here per usual. This podcast is a space for real, honest, open conversation where we literally talk about anything and everything. Nothing is off limits. I'm a licensed therapist in Utah. I have a private practice in Utah. I specialize in trauma. And obviously, that means I specialize in religious trauma. So we do get a lot of submissions on this podcast about Mormonism and the Mormon church. And I love diving into that. I grew up Mormon, so I have a long history of understanding how the culture works. But I also like to talk about anything and everything. So feel free to write in whatever you want to dive into. The submission link is always included in the show notes. And honestly, your submissions is what keeps this podcast going and why I continue to show up here every month. So thank you for being here. As a reminder, this podcast is meant to be reflective and for education, and it is not a form of therapy. Let's dive in today. I thought we would just jump right into submissions and knock some things out that I've been meaning to get to and just haven't in the last few months. And there's a lot of things that have come in, and we're just going to jump in. So, for submission, I'm really scared about my career and my future in general. I want to have kids, be able to dream, but feel stuck because of lack of money, energy, time, and resources. Currently, I'm a lowly paraprofessional at a high school and get paid dirt. I want to grow financially, and whenever I get out of the money pit a little bit, I come crashing back down. It's so embarrassing to admit, but honestly, my boyfriend and I are doing our best. We've tried so hard to get good jobs. I have a bachelor's degree, and it's just sadly not our reality right now. I'm trying to hope that will change because it's very likely to. But the future feels so murky. I know I'm supposed to embrace uncertainty and not figure out every step, but I wish I knew what my career was and how it's going to work out. I want to be a birth doula, but it's hard to get there and to have such an unsteady job with weird times. I have to live this so hard. I want to be able to have kids someday soon too, but it feels so far away. First of all, thank you for writing in and for sharing. I think this is a really vulnerable share and something that I imagine many people are navigating, especially if they're fresh out of school and they're working and they're starting kind of this journey into adulthood. And there are a lot of expectations and pressures about who are you supposed to be? You know, you want to be a mom one day, but you don't feel financially stable to go that direction. And there's just a lot on the table that I'm hearing. And I'm also hearing that it's really hard for you to be present in the here and now, that you're very worried about the future. And I think what comes up for me when I read the submission is that when we're so worried about the future and what comes next and how are we going to check off this box and that box, that it just really dysregulates how we're showing up presently. And it depletes our energy to feel confident in the here and now. I think your stress is valid and what you're worrying about is valid. And then how often are you unpacking and living in the worries instead of just focusing on right now and kind of grinding through the trenches of the hard stuff and trusting the process, which I know is really annoying to hear, which you kind of said, right? But trusting the process to get to that next place that you want to be. I do this with a lot of clients, and I do it with myself too. I think we have this idea that I will be good enough when, and there is a list of all of the things that we need to accomplish in order to feel good enough, in order to feel like we have things figured out and we know what we're doing. And in my opinion, that list just really makes us feel down and depressed because it's just this constant reminder of who we are not and what we have not accomplished in this life. And I think it can be really powerful to metaphorically rip that list up, maybe write that list down, rip it up and throw it away, and just take a moment to notice what you're doing right now. You have a bachelor's degree, you have a job, and yeah, the pay isn't what you want, and you also have a job, and you are starting to build your life and you're working towards financial freedom, even though it's like a slow crawling out process, you're doing a lot of things that are really important and really valuable. And are you noticing those things? Are you celebrating those things? Or are those things still not good enough? Because I think if we're stuck in this place where things are not good enough, that's going to be our reality forever. Who's going to say when you accomplish this next career choice or you're a doula one day, is that going to be good enough if you've never learned how to let the present be good enough? And I always say this to clients, like, you have really great goals, and those goals are going to get you where you need to go. They don't need to be perfect. They don't need to be all figured out, but a goal creates like the trajectory of our life, and it allows us to make choices and decisions that move us towards there. And it's also about being flexible and open and curious and allowing there to be time and space to explore. I think that sometimes we can get an idea and a goal so much in our head that that's the thing that we have to do, that can also feel really debilitating. But it sounds like you know what you want to do, and maybe you're just not quite there yet. So what can you do right now that's going to allow you to work towards that goal? Maybe right now you just need to focus on what you're doing at work. You need to save money. You need to be present in your job and your reality right here, so that in a few years down the road, you have the stability to maybe explore other areas. I think that it can be really anxiety provoking to constantly be thinking about the future and constantly be thinking about things that you could be doing differently or better. And my feedback would be to come back to the here and now, to ground right now and recognize that you have the tools and the resources and the insight to get where you're going. Another question that comes up for me, then, and this might not apply, and maybe it does, is also your brain development. How old are you? I think that a lot of times, our mid 20s, our early to mid 20s, we're experiencing a lot of these questions because that last part of our brain isn't fully developed yet. That part of the brain that really is able to think about the future and to know that things are going to work out and to be able to trust that process. This might also just be like purely a developmental thing, and you need to give yourself a little bit of grace and compassion and know that things will work out. And I think another thing I want to share is just like embracing the uncertainty. You said that, and I get that that's really hard to do. But I think if you can learn to regulate yourself in the uncertainty, that is going to be a tool that serves you for the rest of your life, because there is going to be so many circumstances, situations, experiences that are going to be very uncertain. And if you can learn how to build that skill right now, and that doesn't mean you feel great about uncertainty and that it's super comfortable, but most of the time when we're uncomfortable, that means we're growing, we're changing, we're learning, we're evolving. And I think really leaning into that. And if uncertainty is hard for you, being curious about why that is. Why do you have to have everything figured out? What would it be like for you to not have it all figured out and to just be here in this moment? And I know maybe that sounds a little bit woo-woo, but I think what can create a lot of dysregulation for us is when we're not here and we're just worried about something else. And if you're constantly worrying about tomorrow, you're never here for today. So you're letting tomorrow's worries take you out of today. And the best thing you can do is ground in where you're at and let that fuel you rather than deplete you. Those are just my thoughts. Obviously, again, so many of these submissions don't have a lot of context, and I'm just sharing insights from what comes up for me, my work with clients, my own experiences, right? So take all of this with a grain of salt. And if you have further questions, please write in. Next submission. Over the last 6 years, I've had a total of 2 therapists and 2 psychiatric providers. No one seems to agree on the same diagnosis for me, ranging from dissociative disorders, PTSD, OCD, to selective mutism. I guess I'm just confused and don't know how to move forward. How is there such variability? Some diagnoses make more sense than others, but do the others just not make sense to me because I'm not familiar with this space? I'm curious about your thoughts and advice. First of all, I just want to validate that I think this can feel very confusing when you're going to multiple providers and they're all saying different things. And honestly, what's coming up for me is I feel like they might be missing something. And you shared that some people are saying you have CPTSD. So if that's been a concern, what immediately comes up for me as a therapist, and especially a trauma therapist, is what is your trauma history? Because if you have a significant amount of trauma in your life, generational, developmental, situational, whatever that trauma may be, can really impact how you present in the here and now. So as a trauma therapist, I actually don't diagnose clients very often, because a lot of times, a lot of their symptom presentation is related to trauma. And if we can work through the trauma and address what is causing their distress or the dysregulation, then the symptoms can resolve. So a client could have a diagnosis of anxiety, but is that anxiety just a manifestation of their trauma? And so I think that I would invite you to get curious about, do you need a diagnosis in order to start to do your inner work? And what is a diagnosis going to do for you? Because right now it sounds like it's just becoming more confusing to you. And I think that you don't need a diagnosis in order to start your healing journey. And also, finding a clinician that maybe is more trauma forward and less diagnosis forward, less medical model forward might be more supportive for you because you are feeling really confused. I also think that unfortunately, diagnoses really do fall short. The DSM-5, which is the diagnostical manual that therapists are trained in, does not cover trauma to the extent that it should. And I think that's a huge disservice in the field of therapy. And I'll be really honest with you, all of my trauma training came after graduate school, that I sought out myself to better understand trauma and the nervous system and people's physiology. And I think the medical model falls short in a lot of ways. So my recommendation is always to find a therapist that's trauma informed, that does a trauma body-based therapy, EMDR, brain spotting, somatic experiencing. There's so many different modalities out there. And those modalities can be really supportive to someone who has maybe a history of trauma. Again, I don't know exactly your full history, but as I'm reading this and the, confusion and the differing diagnosis, that's what comes up for me, especially if you have maybe more of a complex symptom presentation. I hope this helps. Please submit any further questions that you have. Okay, let's dive into this one. Caught my husband messaging porn girls on a local Reddit site. His porn addiction took him to this next level, but there was intent for an affair. Not bad enough to leave now, but the betrayal is heartbreaking. He is taking full accountability and doing therapy. How do I process this? How can I fix something I didn't know was broken? We have been so good. Married 18 years, kids, great sex life, finally into his career. There is zero excuse. What if I didn't find this message? What's depressing is while he is healing and doing everything to make things better, I'm left broken and can't function. Oh, thank you so much for sharing this. I imagine this felt like a huge betrayal to you and was really heartbreaking to discover. I don't know if you were raised in Mormon culture, if Mormonism plays any part of this. I think I only bring that up because I know porn addiction is really something that is very problematic in Utah. And I don't necessarily believe in porn addiction. I think people abuse porn, but I think a lot of that comes from actually just repressed sexual stuff and from growing up in a culture that taught you to repress your sexual behavior and masturbation and all of those things. And so I think that's one component here. But I also think as a woman, when you grow up in this culture and you learn that your partner's abusing porn, that also can be very activating because of the culture in which you were raised and just how taboo porn was and all of those things. So I just want to add that for context. Again, maybe you are not a member of the Mormon church, but I think in general, porn addiction gets porn use, I'm not even use the word addiction, gets a really bad rap because of the stigma associated with it, because of the control around sexuality. And so I think what's important here is that your partner is taking full accountability and doing therapy. And what I'm hearing is that you're really struggling and you're really activated by this, which is incredibly valid. And I would say that that is your responsibility, not his choices, not his decisions, but the activation you feel. You said, I'm left broken and can't function. I feel like I've been betrayed. Those are heavy things to feel, and they're stirring something up in your nervous system. And that's your responsibility to work through. That might sound a little bit harsh, and it's not, I'm not trying to sound harsh, but I'm saying you're activated for a reason. It's hitting a wound within you. And I think going into those wounds and curiously exploring them are going to allow you to better know how you want to navigate this relationship with your partner. Is it able to repair? Because if you don't give those emotions and those activations the attention and respect that they deserve, how are you going to know if this relationship is something you want to continue, or can you actually work through with him if you just still have all these feelings? Maybe you have some resentment, which is totally valid, right? And so I think part of this is doing some of your own work around why is this so upsetting. I think obviously it is upsetting just in and of itself, right? But we tend to be extra activated when there's underlying things happening in our own nervous system. And I also want to say, I think a lot of couples go through really, really hard times. And this situation is heartbreaking and there's a lot of betrayal there. And it's also can be this really beautiful opportunity to repair and reconnect and maybe have some hard conversations that you weren't having before and to express how this is impacting you and to be more vulnerable with your partner. And maybe he can be more vulnerable for you. So I think while these breaks can feel really distressing and really dysregulating, they can also be this opportunity to reconnect and grow and evolve together. As someone personally who grew up in purity culture, who I've had to do a lot of work around this myself and just like my own sexuality and my partner's sexuality as someone as a man who didn't grow up in purity culture and is much more of like a sexual person, much more open. It's actually been really healing to me because I've had to kind of dive in and curiously explore things and confront my own demons with porn and all of that, right? So now we have this very open sexual relationship where we can talk about everything and I can feel comfortable in my sexuality and show up in a way that allows him to express himself. I think for so many couples in this situation, there's so much repression, both for you and for him. Clearly, he's repressing something. He has shame for something. If he's using porn to the extent that he was, if he's messaging other girls, like he is acting out in a sexual way. And so I'm curious, like, where is that coming from? That's not your fault. That's his. Like, that's his responsibility, right? But I think, like, how do you start to create space in your relationship where you have this dialogue about where is this coming from? What were we not allowed to explore? What are we not exploring in our marriage? How do we start to have more open, curious conversations about sexuality if that's an issue? I don't know, right? I'm not in your marriage. And again, this is just like a little blip, but I think I want to validate your feelings. I think everything you're feeling is real and true, and it deserves to be respected and honored and explored. And honestly, he can't fix that for you. You're the only one that can go into your own being and explore your own activation. And it might be worth seeking out your own therapist if you haven't already to work through some of this. And then maybe you guys need couples therapy to work through it together. I think that there's a lot of hope in that. And it's also okay to be scared and nervous and unsure. Okay, next submission. This is messy. I, a straight man, fully believed that the gospel said that I, as a priesthood holder, had to serve everyone in my family, ward, everywhere. And that if I did that, others would support me. I ran myself into the ground until I was totally spent several times in my life, and no one, leaders, friends, parents, or wife, ever stepped in to support. I was just expected to endure. I know this is a common feeling for women, which is why I identify more with them, but also I'm furious because apparently I was the only man not to take advantage of the priesthood. I never could have brought myself to that, but I also feel extra betrayed and I struggle to let it go. How do all of these men pretend that the gospel didn't say they shouldn't be killing themselves in service, even more than their wives? Sorry, that was long. I didn't think it was too long at all. This submission stood out to me because, excuse me, I actually think it names something that maybe a lot of men are not able to name or are not consciously aware of, because I think there's a lot of men, unfortunately, that do abuse the priesthood and don't show up maybe in the way that they could, and they don't sacrifice them to the degree you're talking about. But I do think there are a lot of men silently suffering in Mormonism. I do think a lot of men are sacrificing themselves to this extent, and maybe it's not showing up as blatantly as you experience. But I also think no, men are not talking about it as openly maybe as women would, right? Because women are just socialized to be more emotional, more vulnerable. But I actually think a lot of men feel this way. I think a lot of men are conditioned to endure just as much as the women are in the church. And it's really heartbreaking. And I think it has to feel so lonely as a man, again, because people aren't talking about it and it isn't named. I don't know if men are pretending. Maybe they have to you. Maybe they don't acknowledge it. But I think a lot of men in this culture need to be the breadwinner. They need to do everything for their family. They need to hold all their callings. They need to take care of their congregation. I mean, I've heard so many stories of people whose fathers were absent because they were serving the bishopric on Sundays and not home with their kids, right? So I think this is very much a cultural thing. And it also makes sense to me why you feel so alone in it and why you don't feel seen in it, because I don't think it's named and I don't think it's talked about. So props to you for naming it. Oh man, it breaks my heart because I think there's a lot of silent suffering, like I've already said. And how does it change if no one ever talks about it? I think the priesthood is very harmful to women, obviously. I think the priesthood is harmful to men. I think men just don't see it because there is a lot more quote unquote benefits that come with it for the men, but the damage is still there. Instead of like creating this like equal partnership in a relationship, it positions the man as the person having the authority that takes the brunt of everything. And right, you said, I fully believed that the gospel said I as a priesthood holder had to serve everyone. That is how you interpreted it. And I don't know how old you were when you interpreted it, but I would imagine you were probably pretty young. And I think that's another conversation that's a little bit like unrelated, but related, right? Like the way we receive doctrinal messages or lessons from the church depends on so much, right? Like what's our temperament? What's our trauma history? Were we outgoing? Were we introverted? There's so much nuance and complexity that goes into being a human being. So everyone's going to interpret it differently. And then especially children. And so it can create like and wire in our nervous system in a way that becomes like a genuine belief or a truth. And then it creates a lot of distress and dysregulation. And I think that's also another part of this is that, that was maybe something you were predisposed to internalize in a way that maybe some of your other male counterparts didn't. But it sounds like you're also more self-aware. Maybe you're more sensitive. Maybe you're able to be more vulnerable. And I think that's a strength for you as well. And so I think too, just giving yourself some grace and compassion and allow yourself to be mad, allow yourself to feel betrayed and hurt. And also give yourself credit for seeing it for what it is, because many people, many men are unable to do that. Okay, next submission. Living in a mixed faith marriage right now, my husband still believes with his whole heart and is respectful and supportive of me stepping away from the church, but he still wants to raise our kids in the church. I try to be supportive of him since he's so supportive of me, but I'm finding it difficult when it comes to raising our kids in the church. We've compromised so far and go to church twice a month and only do prayers at home, no scripture study or come follow me lessons, but I still feel anxious about what my kids will be learning. I ultimately want nothing to do with the church, but we're only a year into me telling my husband I don't believe anymore, and I worry about pushing him too far too fast. Not that I'm afraid of his reaction. It's more that I don't want to hurt him more when I've already thrown his world upside down. How do I navigate a mixed faith marriage with kids? So I actually, if you haven't listened to my last episode, I want you to go back and listen to that. It's called Baptism and Hard Conversations. I talk a lot about like navigating raising kids in the church in this like mixed faith dynamic. Again, I'm not a mixed faith marriage specialist, couples therapist. I just have some experience in working with clients on it. So that's kind of more the expertise or arena it's coming from. So I would invite you to listen to that. I kind of dive into that in the last episode, but I want to I pulled the submission. I want to talk about it because I talk about it all the time with many different clients, also with friends. So I know quite a few people who are in a mixed faith dynamic, and many of them being women who have left the church, and kind of how they're navigating that with their partners. There is a part, right, where you want them to be where you're at, and you're mindful of that. You're mindful to be respectful of where he's at. And I think my biggest piece of feedback to you is to just, again, continue to show him the same respect that he's showing you. I am hearing that you guys have made a lot of compromises into how you're raising the kids in the church. And yes, your kids can be impacted by what's being taught and all of that, but they also have a mom who they can have really safe conversations with. And I think if you're always making that known, that really helps reduce the harm. But again, it sounds like to me, you and your partner have been able to kind of find this like mutually beneficial agreement. And I think what can be really powerful is him receiving your healing. And what I mean by that is not you like saying how much better you are because you're not a member of the church or anything like that, but you being able to just be this support, this loving person, this great mom, someone who feels grounded and secure in who they are, right? Like as you function and you do well, he is going to see that. He is going to see that you are okay without religion. He is going to receive that healing. And maybe he'll question, maybe he won't. But I guess, do you need him to in order to be okay? And I think that's something to be curious about and to explore. But I think if I know anything, we can't make people question. And that doesn't do any good, right? It just makes them dig further in. But he's probably scared. He's probably unsure. You're representing something to him that maybe he's never even been able to consider. And I think how you navigate it and how you show up for him really allows him to feel safe too. And I think that needs to be on both sides, right? Like, I think he needs to be respectful and supportive of where you're at, but it's like, how do we offer that same thing to him and let him have his own time to explore it? I actually have a friend that I've talked about this a lot with, and it's something I've learned a lot from her too in this regard, and her just sharing how, because this is how she's shown up in her mixed faith marriage, her husband is now actually having conversations with her and asking her questions that he wasn't prior. And he wasn't like reflecting on things in the way he is now. And I think so much of that came from just like this respectful relationship that they have, that she conveyed that I'm a safe person if you ever want to talk, without ever even saying that, right? And I think really embodying that can allow you to just be that for him one day if he ever wants to go down that road. And I think obviously there's always open dialogue about raising kids and how can you compromise and all of that. But I think the mutual respect in your partnership is what creates so much safety and allows a place for questions, right? Maybe that sounds like interesting, because I would say I'm kind of like an abrasive person and I'm very direct and I'm very honest, but I think that's coming from a different place, right? Whenever I'm like working with clients in these mixed faith dynamics and they're like, oh, I just don't want my partner to believe in the church anymore, I'll invite them to be curious, like, why? Why is that so upsetting to you that they believe? What's that bringing up in you? I think sometimes we want our partners on our side here because we are questioning ourselves. Like, are we making the right choice? So I think really leaning into yourself and feeling grounded and secure in your choices and decisions will allow you to feel more comfortable in a mixed faith dynamic and kind of trust that you can be okay even if your partner doesn't believe the same thing. And is he able to still respect you for not believing? And like, can you show him the same respect, which I believe you're really modeling. I've been actually just really curious about this in general, in terms of like, how do I help people start to be curious and open? And it has to be done in a way that is really gentle and respectful of their beliefs. And I have a lot of clients who have reached out to me for therapy who I've worked with, who are actually members of the LDS church. And they come to me because I know I'm familiar with LDS culture and they know that I'm not going to judge them for their questions, but I'm also not pushing anything on them either. I'm just listening curiously. I'm asking about what they believe, how that impacts them, and just like constantly show up and attune to them and show them respect. And then when they're ready, they have those conversations with me. It's not me leading them away from the church, right? It's them learning to trust their own instincts and their own intuition and to start to curiously explore those questions. I don't know if any of you watched Trust Me, the False Prophet, but that's one thing that really stood out to me about Christine is she didn't say anything bad about Warren Jeffs because she had to get in. She didn't say anything bad about Samuel Bateman because she had to get in and get their trust. And it's made me reflect a lot. Like, how do I have this like social media platform where I talk about the harm of the church? And that's like obviously like pushing people away because people don't want to see it. And it's such a delicate balance. And I think my social media platform feels like necessary to talk about some of those uncomfortable truths. But if I think about who I am as a clinician and how I show up for my clients and how I show up in a therapy way, it is very much like Christine. I'm not here to talk shit on their family or their belief system or their partner, right? I'm here to hold space so that they can learn to feel empowered and connected to themselves and make choices and decisions that are in alignment with themselves. And sometimes that means they're staying in their church, right? And sometimes that means they're leaving. And I'm not here to judge that. I'm just here to hold space for that and honor that. And so I didn't mean to like kind of go off on this tangent from that last submission, but that's what like it's coming up for me in terms of like, how do we navigate a mixed faith dynamic? How do we respect our partner's decisions? And I think if we're disrespectful or we're constantly pushing something on them, they're going to just dig in harder. They're just going to keep believing because we're not safe, And so how do we show safety? And then I think also, to your kids, if your kids are going to church and they're believing, how do you maintain like to be a safe person for them, for their questions, for the things they want to explore? And I think a lot of that is through honest conversation and sharing your thoughts and your feelings and your concerns, and then asking them what they think. It all depends on the different ages and what's developmentally appropriate, but I think there is absolutely a way to coexist in these dynamics. And it's also stressful and hard, and it would be so much easier if you were on the same page. Like, I validate and honor that. But I also think sometimes we get so caught up in not being on the same page in our own distress and our own dysregulation that it brings us out of how to like best support ourselves, our partners, our kids in the present moment. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if you have made the brave decision to question your faith and leave Mormonism, which is such a high control religion, right? That has literally created your identity and the foundation of who you are. If you've made the brave choice to step outside of that, you have so many internal resources. Like, you have so many instincts in you that will guide you and support you to navigate a mixed faith marriage, to navigate raising kids in this mixed faith dynamic. Like, no doubt in my mind, you are a very grounded individual to make the choice to leave, because that is such a difficult choice. Okay, that was like a long rant. Thank you all for listening to that. I actually don't have any more submissions. I pulled all of these ones and I got through them rather quickly. I think it's so funny because at the end of all of these podcast episodes, after I answer all your submissions, I'll be really transparent. I get a little bit insecure. Like, did I say the right thing? Did I show up in the way they wanted me to show up? Like, did I even make sense? And it's hard. It's a really activating situation because I want you all to get to know me and for me to be like honest and messy and vulnerable. And then also, what if you don't like what I have to say? And it's like that. I think that's a really like human part of me. And I think that's just kind of where I want to end is it's just like this really big disclaimer that I am a human and I am a therapist and I have that therapist lens, but this is not therapy, right? You're not in my office. We're not working together like client therapist. I'm just offering some insight. So take it all with a grain of salt, right? Like, I am good if like something I said didn't resonate, or you're like, yeah, that didn't make any sense, Ashley. Like, I love feedback. I'm so open to feedback. I think it makes me like just a better human in general. So know that like if something didn't resonate, that's okay. And if you need more clarity or you want me to talk about things in a different way, or if you feel like I completely missed the mark, like please like send that in the submissions. Like let's chat about it. I love like honest, accountable conversations. I'm not afraid of accountability. I don't know if that's like my response from like growing up in a culture, especially within Mormonism, that takes no accountability for anything, that I'm like almost over accountable. But yeah, I really think that one of my skill sets is to own my missteps and my mistakes. And so anyways, I just wanted to say that because I think that as much as I love doing this podcast and I love like reading your guys' submissions, it also makes me feel like anxious and like I have imposter syndrome sometimes. Like, am I really qualified to even be doing this? Like, am I making a difference? You know, like all of those things come up. So I guess we'll just kind of end there with me being vulnerable and real and honest. So as always, thank you so much for tuning in, for listening, for writing in. Please keep writing. Ask me anything. It doesn't have to be related to the church. Like, I mean, it can be just random stuff you want to know. I would love to talk about all the things. The submission link is in the show notes, as always. And yeah, again, just take what resonates, leave what doesn't. Take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you all next month.